The world watched in disbelief on February 24, 2022. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Missile strikes rained down on cities across the country. Ground troops moved in from multiple directions. Explosions were reported near major urban centers, including Kyiv. This was an act of aggression not seen in Europe for decades. Russia claimed its goals were to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. However, the international community saw this as a baseless pretext. The invasion aimed to topple Ukraine's government. Ukrainians showed immediate resolve, preparing to defend their homes. The invasion triggered an international outcry. World leaders condemned Russia's actions and promised consequences. The United Nations convened emergency meetings. Russia's veto power hampered decisive action. Nations and alliances began formulating responses. These included sanctions, humanitarian aid, and military support. The invasion saw rapid Russian advances, yet it was marked by fierce Ukrainian resistance. The conflict was a battle for national survival and identity. In the early weeks of the full-scale invasion, Russian forces made significant territorial gains. They advanced from the north, east, and south. Columns of tanks and armored vehicles pushed towards major cities. Russian troops reached the outskirts of Kiev, the capital. They also moved on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city. In the south, they captured the strategic port city of Kherson. The speed of the initial Russian movements caused widespread alarm. However, the Ukrainian military, bolstered by its people, mounted a surprisingly strong defense. They utilized their knowledge of the local terrain effectively. They employed mobile tactics to counter the Russian advances. Western-supplied anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles proved crucial. These weapons helped to inflict heavy losses on Russian armor and aircraft. Ukrainian resistance was far more robust than many, including perhaps Moscow, had anticipated. The fight for every town and village was fierce. This slowed the Russian offensive considerably. Logistical problems soon plagued the Russian military machine. Supply lines became overstretched and vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. Ukrainian forces capitalized on these weaknesses. The southern city of Kherson fell to Russian forces in March 2022. It was one of the first major Ukrainian cities to be occupied. During the occupation, residents endured harsh conditions. Reports of repression and abuses were widespread. The population showed quiet resistance. They awaited liberation. In November 2022, the Ukrainian army recaptured Kherson. Residents celebrated in the streets. They waved flags and greeted their liberators. Testimonies detailed systematic torture. These accounts painted a grim picture. The liberation was a major blow to Russia. It demonstrated Ukraine's capability to reclaim territory. The suffering did not end with liberation. A United Nations report in May 2025 brought new horrors to light. The Independent International Commission concluded Russian forces committed crimes against humanity. Since July 2024, Russian forces used remote-controlled drones. They targeted civilians along the Dnipro River. The trauma continues, even in a liberated city. The war in Ukraine has exacted a terrible human cost. The conflict has resulted in over 50,000 civilian deaths since February 2022. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Many are internally displaced within Ukraine. Others have sought refuge in neighboring countries and beyond. The displacement crisis is one of the largest Europe has seen since World War II. Families have been torn apart. Entire communities have been uprooted. Military casualties on both sides have also been immense. While precise figures are difficult to verify independently, estimates paint a grim picture. The combined number of military personnel killed or wounded is believed to be well over 100,000. Recent reports from early May 2025 suggest that at least 45,000 Russian troops have been killed in the past year alone. Broader estimates indicate significant Russian casualties ranging between 165,000 and 235,000 since the start of the full-scale invasion. Ukraine too has suffered heavy military losses in its fight to defend its sovereignty. The last official figure released by Ukraine was in December 2024. At that time they reported 43,000 military deaths. The true number is likely higher. Throughout 2024, the fighting in eastern Ukraine intensified significantly. The Luhansk and Donetsk regions, collectively known as the Donbas, remained the epicenter of the conflict. Russia has long aimed to capture the entirety of the Donbas. Despite relentless attacks and heavy fighting, the front line in this region has barely moved for nearly 2 years. This illustrates the entrenched nature of the conflict. Both sides have poured enormous resources into this attritional warfare. In May 2024, Russia launched a new offensive in northern Ukraine. Russian forces crossed the border north of Kharkiv. They managed to seize several villages in this surprise push. This offensive occurred at a critical time. Supplies of US weapons to Ukraine had been stalled due to political debates in Washington. However, Ukrainian forces eventually managed to hold firm. They prevented a deeper Russian advance. Kharkiv city, a major population center, remained beyond the effective range of Russian artillery. The summer of 2024 saw Ukraine launch its own major counteroffensive. Ukrainian forces aimed to reclaim significant territories. They focused particularly on the eastern regions occupied by Russia. This counteroffensive achieved some notable successes. Ukraine managed to liberate several areas. In a surprising turn of events, Ukrainian forces launched a significant incursion into Russia's western Kursk region in August 2024. This marked a bold move, taking the war onto Russian soil in a more substantial way than previously seen. Ukrainian troops advanced up to 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory at one point. They claimed control over 1,200 square kilometers and reportedly captured 93 villages. This operation was a significant psychological blow to Moscow. It demonstrated Ukraine's capacity to project force beyond its own borders. Concurrent with this incursion, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an interesting proposal. He suggested a potential swap of Russian-held territory in Ukraine for the territory seized by Ukrainian forces in Kursk. This idea was floated as a possible avenue for future negotiations. However, it did not gain immediate traction with Moscow. The Kursk operation served multiple purposes for Ukraine. It diverted Russian resources, it created a bargaining chip, and it aimed to bring the reality of war closer to the Russian population. The fighting in Kursk was intense. Russia understandably reacted strongly to the Kursk incursion. The international response to Russia's full-scale invasion has been multifaceted and evolving. Western nations, including the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, moved quickly to impose extensive economic sanctions on Russia. These sanctions targeted Russian banks, state-owned enterprises, key individuals, and access to technology. The aim was to cripple Russia's war machine. They also sought to isolate Moscow economically and politically. Over time, these sanctions have been progressively tightened and expanded. Ukraine, in its fight for survival, has received substantial military aid from NATO members and other Western allies. This support has included a wide range of weaponry, from anti-tank missiles and artillery systems to drones and air defense capabilities. Financial assistance and humanitarian aid have also poured into Ukraine. This international backing has been crucial for Ukraine's ability to resist the Russian aggression. One of the most significant geopolitical consequences of the war has been the expansion of NATO. Russia's aggression inadvertently spurred Finland and Sweden to abandon their long-standing policies of neutrality. Both nations sought the security of NATO membership. They officially joined the alliance in 2024. The economic impact of the war on Ukraine has been nothing short of catastrophic. Russia's invasion has caused widespread destruction of critical infrastructure. This includes roads, bridges, power plants, and residential buildings. Industrial output has plummeted. Agricultural production, vital for Ukraine's economy and global food security, has been severely disrupted. The country has experienced a sharp decline in its gross domestic product, or GDP. Millions of Ukrainians have lost their livelihoods. The cost of reconstruction will be astronomical. It will require sustained international support for many years to come. Russia's economy has also faced significant strain due to the war and the subsequent international sanctions. While Moscow has attempted to mitigate the impact through various measures, the costs are undeniable. Sanctions have restricted access to Western markets and technologies. This has led to inflation and currency devaluation. Foreign investment has largely dried up. The immense financial resources diverted to fund the war effort could have been used for domestic development. The long-term consequences for Russia's economic modernization and global standing are likely to be severe. As of late May 2025, the situation on the ground in Ukraine remains largely a stalemate, particularly in the east. Despite 2 years of intense and brutal fighting, the front lines in regions like Luhansk and Donetsk have seen minimal movement. Russia currently holds an advantage in terms of manpower. It is estimated to have around 620,000 soldiers operating in Ukraine and in the bordering Kursk region of Russia. Recently, Russian forces have made some incremental advances. These include pushes towards the strategic town of Pokrovsk and efforts to close a Ukrainian pocket near Toretsk. Diplomatic efforts to find a peaceful resolution have been ongoing, albeit with limited success. Since President Donald Trump took office in the United States in early 2025, his administration has actively pursued an end to the war through negotiation. However, these efforts have been complicated by high tensions between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. Trump has publicly accused Zelensky of risking a wider conflict, even World War III. While the US has made attempts to improve relations with Moscow, ceasefire talks have repeatedly stalled. The path to peace remains elusive and fraught with challenges.